He was born April 3rd, 1755. His parents were Mark and Mary Miller Kenton. As a child, he wouldn't go to school, and as a result, he never learned to read or write anything other than his name. He loved the woods and he hated farm work. So, as a child, he was kind of lazy, I guess you could say. He just wanted to go play in the woods. When he was 16 years old, he confronted and fought William Leachman. Simon wanted revenge on Leachman for marrying a girl he had wanted to marry, and after being beaten by Leachman at their wedding. So after that, he went and he beat Leachman himself, and he thought he had killed Leachman, so he ran away from home. He headed to Warm Springs, Virginia, where he introduced himself as Simon Butler to a prosperous widower, Jacob Butler, in hopes that he would be taken as a distant relative and he would be given work. So basically he lied so he could kind of get special treatment. And then Mr. Butler, he took him in and he treated him as a son as well, and he gave him work. So he wanted to explore the wilderness, so when Jacob Butler took him in, Simon worked hard towards his goal. And after 2 months, Butler gave him equipment for frontier survival, and Simon traveled to Fort Pitt, where he partnered with John Yeager and George Strader. They explored Kentucky in 1 year, but in the second year, John was killed in a confrontation with Indians, and George, after that, decided to leave frontier life. When he was 19, he joined the Virginia militia as a scout. He served for many years under George Rogers Clark. They fought against the Shawnee and Mingo Indians. When a treaty was negotiated, Simon delivered Chief Logan's famous speech, because Logan had refused to attend negotiations. During this small war, Simon met his lifelong friend Simon Girty. Simon and Girty separated when the militia was disbanded, hoping to meet again soon. Although the treaty had been signed, Simon still had to protect settlers from Indian raids throughout Kentucky. So he was working and fighting the Indians who, even though there was a treaty, they kept raiding the settlers, but he didn't get paid for any of this anymore since the militia was disbanded. His other victories, he continued to scout the British allies who were the Indians for Clark during the Revolutionary War. At Fort Boonesborough, named after Daniel Boone, he saved Daniel Boone when the Indians, they did a small attack on people who were collecting wood, and they thought Boone and some others thought it was just like a small raid, so they went out to try to defend them, and then the other Indians came out and surprised him. So they were fighting their way back to the fort, and Simon came. And after Boone was injured in his arm, Simon carried him and saved his life. He got him back to the fort. Simon's fame, which had been growing ever since his first confrontation with the Indians who had killed John Yeager, it grew rapidly after that. In 1778, Simon rallied men for a secret mission led by Clark, in which they captured the British-held French towns of Kaskaskia and Cahokia, without a single shot being fired. The gauntlets. Does anyone know what that is? While scouting at a Shawnee village, Chillicothe, Simon was discovered while his powder was wet. And if your powder is wet, your gun doesn't shoot. He was captured by the Shawnee, who began planning how best to torture their great enemy. They brought him to Chillicothe, where he was forced to run the gauntlet. The gauntlet, if Simon made it to the council house, through the men, women, and children who would beat him with clubs, poles, and vines of thorns, he wouldn't have to run it again. But after failing twice, he was knocked out, and when the chief returned, Simon was taken to other villages to run the gauntlet, slowly working their way to Wabatomica, where he would burn at stake. So very gruesome. It was not something that you wanted to do. The gauntlet was very painful. Before being burned, Simon was rescued by his old friend Simon Girty, who had become a British agent and a friend to the Shawnee. Unfortunately, after a hard loss in Virginia, the Shawnee changed their minds and prepared to execute Simon. Gertie was unable to talk them out of it, but he convinced them to have the execution at the British trading post of Upper Sandusky. We have a picture from Upper Sandusky there. On the way there, Simon's arm was broken, he received an axe to the shoulder, and every night he spent with his limbs stretched out and staked to the ground. When he reached the trading post, his burning was postponed by heavy rain, long enough for Captain Peter Drouillard to persuade the Shawnee to let British question him in Detroit before they executed him. He was taken to Detroit, where he was well cared for, but to the Shawnee's disappointment, he was not returned. After the war, so Simon and several others made it. They successfully escaped from Detroit and trekked back to Kentucky. Simon was reunited with his brother John Kenton on the Ohio River and discovered that he hadn't killed William Leachman in that first fight he had. With this knowledge, he began going by Simon Kenton once again. 3 years later, he returned to Virginia and reunited with the rest of his family after being away for 12 years. Simon persuaded his parents, siblings, and some relatives and neighbors to return with him to Kentucky. His father was sickly and didn't survive the trip, but his mother lived in Kentucky until her death in 1807. Simon married Martha Dowden in Kentucky Station, which was built in Kenton Station, which was built in 1775. Unfortunately, 9 years after their marriage, Martha was severely burned in a house fire, and after she gave birth to a stillborn baby, which would have been their 5th child, she died from her injuries. Wait, that's left the order. Sorry. In 1798, Kenton remarried the cousin of his first wife, Elizabeth Jarboe. They moved to Cincinnati, where they had 6 children. They started a new settlement named Springfield, Ohio. In 1808, Simon went to camp meetings with his family during the Second Great Awakening. While there, his wife was convicted of her sins, and she converted. And after Simon talked with the preacher about his own sins, he too converted. After his conversion, Simon began carrying a hickory staff instead of his rifle. Towards the end of his life, he lost most of his land and was imprisoned twice because of land debt. He was released in 1821 when the law that imprisoned him was repealed. His final years were spent with his family in Zanesfield, Ohio. He died in 1836 with his wife Elizabeth at his side. During his life, Simon helped thousands of settlers who came to Kentucky, Ohio, and the Northwest Territory. Although most Indians saw him as an enemy, he had many Indian friends. When Simon Girty had saved him from death, an Indian woman had adopted him to replace her deceased son. Simon paid for the education of his children as well as Indian children, and during the War of 1812, he defended Indians living on his land from soldiers who considered them the enemy. He had a remarkable memory, and he could remember the geography of the lands he explored with incredible accuracy, which made him a reliable witness in land disputes. At one period, he owned thousands of acres of land in every place he explored. Today, the memory of him is honored with landmarks such as Simon Kenton Bridge and Simon Kenton High School. So, I think I've told most of you this, but he is my 7th great-grandfather. I'm 9 generations below him. So, this is a little blurry, so it's hard to read. But, so, his first wife, Martha Dowden, their child, Nancy Kenton, married William McCarty, and they had Elizabeth McCarty, who married Gibson Tungate, and then they had James Perry Tungate, who married Lenora Parker, Mabel Tungate, who married Louis Ferdinand Peebles, then Clifford Bryan Peebles and Irene Orat had Naomi Peebles, who married Benjamin Newell Spiegel, and Naomi Peebles was my great-great-grandfather. Great-grandmother. And she had Ada Spiegel, who had Greg Spiegel, who had me. So my family is descended from him.
That's so cool.
Thank you. And he had 11 children, so there's a good chance that someone else in this room is also descended from him.